Hello, I'm Jenny Stotts. In Rotary, I volunteer with District 6690 as the district membership chair and with Zone 30 as an assistant Rotary coordinator. I'm a member of the Athens Sunrise Rotary Club in Athens, Ohio. Professionally, I serve the state of Ohio as Ohio's youth ombudsman. So I work with youth around the state and work hard to protect their rights and to help resolve their concerns when they bring them to my attention. I've worked my entire career in this type of arena in the child welfare space. I previously worked in a court-based setting, working on child advocacy. I've also worked in child protective services and even served as a forensic interviewer for a number of years, working with child sexual assault victims. And I'm carrying on my work with children and with families, but now at a much bigger level here in the state of Ohio. We talk so often about treating others with kindness and speaking with kindness and acting with kindness. But I think, especially as leaders, but everyone, we must boldly commit to listening with kindness, which is probably the most challenging thing to do of them all. And not just, using our ears to hear what people say, but as a leader, I think you have to observe and assess constantly. You're not just listening to what people say, but you're watching how they say it. You're witnessing their success and their challenges. And so, injecting kindness and compassion and understanding into conversations where we have to be the ones to deliver feedback or to deliver the bad news, but also when we're taking it. If someone is frustrated or concerned or has ideas about, something we've done or the way that we've carried out a project or a task, we have to listen with kindness and understand their perspective when they're bringing that information to us, but also, being kind to ourselves when we're listening to that, because it's so easy when we hear, especially in lead roles where you're making tough decisions, when we hear that kind of feedback, it's so easy to feel defensive. And we do that when we're not being kind to ourselves and kind to the person that we're listening to. So when we listen with kindness, we can kind of slow things down in our minds a little bit, but we can position ourselves to better process that information in the absence of our ego. In my work, I would often say center the child in every conversation that we're having. And so when we do that, even when we're not talking about, child welfare, if we're just talking about planning a project or planning an event together, if we center that in the middle of that conversation, rather than looking at it, through the lens of our own ego and our own pride, or feeling defensive about, the perspective or the criticisms that others bring to that table, we can really focus on moving that goal forward and having forward momentum. So when I think about leading with empathy, I really think about listening with kindness. So I think at work, we have to recognize that our coworkers and colleagues, regardless of what position everyone holds, I always say, regardless of what everyone's business card says, our coworkers, our colleagues are people. They have interests and loved ones and families and hobbies and fears and, their own backgrounds, their own baggage, if you will. And all of those things together present us, with this unique person who has unique needs that, we have to fill, that we have to meet. But they also make our teams a lot stronger. In the Rotary space or in the volunteer space, I think we have to remember that our members and people who support our organizations are volunteers, and that they're here because they care. If someone, tells me, they're too busy to work on this project, or, they don't have the bandwidth, to work on something, it's far too easy. It's kind of lazy for us to assume that they're not as committed as me, or they're not as committed as other people. But instead, I think we have to honor their words at value. And if you're, really interested in moving things forward and kind of valuing them, get to know them. And, instead of asking, where have you been? Or why are you backing out? Why are you dropping the ball? Instead, say things like, how are you? How can I help you? Are there things that you need to learn to help you move forward on this project? And I think, again, that just comes right back to what I started with of listening with kindness, and being willing to let someone be the expert of themselves. I think particularly in work settings, high pressure work settings, it's really easy for us to assume that we know everything there is to know about someone. And we have to remember that we only see a slice of them when they come to work. We only see one little part of their day. We only see one little part of probably even their abilities. So I think that we have to remind ourselves that they know themselves better than we know them, and be willing to listen to them as an expert in themselves, and be willing to make adjustments and help fill their needs. Because there's no rule that says when we start doing something a certain way, or we make a decision in a certain way, that we can't react to new information that comes along. We can do that. So if we learn something new, if we hear something new, if we take new feedback and that adjusts our course of action, that's fantastic. That's not a failure. That's us listening and adapting and being nimble. And I think that we can do that when we're thinking about project management, when we're thinking about moving, tasks forward or goals forward. But I think we can also do that when we're assessing our own leadership style, our own work style, and those around us. When you think about, our ability to meet someone's needs, right? To meet their basic needs from an employer perspective, like if we're meeting their basic needs, so they, have, enough resources to take care of their family. And then if we kind of move that up and we start taking care of their emotional needs and their spiritual needs, we're letting them feel fulfilled. We're letting them grow and develop. And then I think that, that kind of unlocks that potential for us to be innovative and creative. So I think when, in an employer space, when we lead with empathy, I think we have a healthier and happier workforce, and that pays off for us in a lot of ways. In volunteer organizations like Rotary, but like any volunteer organization, I think when we lead with empathy, they grow. I think they grow and they get stronger and their impact grows. Thinking specifically about Rotary, I had the honor of serving as a president of my Rotary Club several years ago, and that year is often noted because we inducted 27 new members that year, which is a lot of new members to bring into a Rotary Club, in 12 short months. And what I'm actually most proud of is that we had 100% retention. Every member of our club stayed engaged, and every member, 100% of them, were engaged in service projects throughout the year. So they were engaged in the business of making our community stronger. And that is not because I was the president. That is not because I had a lot of great service project ideas. I'm not that creative. I'm not that inventive. It's because our members had a lot of great ideas. They had their hands in so many parts of our community, and they understood what the need was. And I think what I did, the value I brought to that table, was that I just took the time to listen to them. I kind of went on a listening tour within our club and met with every member, learned a little bit more about why they were involved and why this was important to them, and then helped connect the right people to propel those projects and propel that impact forward. And so I think when people are engaged in what they do and they're excited about what they do, whether it's work or volunteering or family activities, but when people are engaged and fulfilled, they're kind of magnetic. In our world, I mean world in every sense of the word, the global world, our community as a world, and even the world that exists in our own homes and in our own families. But I think our world benefits when we give and get empathy to one another. And I think the world, in every sense of that word, benefits when we are boldly kind, when we take the time to listen and to listen with kindness. Yeah, when I think about organizations that lead with empathy, I really look for that structure, that communication channel, and then is there a method to how they're growing? Is there intentionality about it? And I think that that's probably those organizations that are have the healthiest spirit, if you will. One question to ask is upward communication just as easy as downward communication? Is information flowing both ways? Is this an organization that takes care of their members or takes care of their employees? Do people feel safe in this organization? Is there equity? Is there justice within this organization? And I think, good bosses, if we're talking about bosses, build teams where, the goal is performance and kind of almost lifting up the boss's profile. But I think great leaders build teams by looking at their weaknesses and looking at vulnerabilities, even their own weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And then they recruit and surround their team with others who have strength in those areas. And particularly if you're new to a positional leadership, it's really easy to not want to delegate or to not want to, give tasks to the people around you because you're afraid they might replace you or they're maybe gunning for your job or for your position. That's being really focused on yourself and really looking at how you're elevating your own profile and growing your own kind of, resume or whatever, we're talking about. But when you're focused on actually achieving goals and actually moving forward and building a really strong and really effective team, you have to recognize the things that you're good at and the things that you're not very good at, or the things where you have a lot of opportunities or it's a weakness. And then you need to recruit people who help fill those gaps, because that makes the organization stronger, that makes the team stronger. So, I hear a lot about work-life balance, or, I know that the new term is life balance. And I think we have to move past balance and talk about harmony. I say a lot, I wear a lot of hats. But in fact, I'm wearing every hat all the time. Just because I take one hat off, I'm not throwing it away. It's still there. It still impacts me. Professionally, I work in a high stress, high pressure field. My work also happens to be highly confidential. It's been that way for my entire career. So if I, have a stressful day, I can't necessarily download that challenging day on my husband or my friends when I get home. Because of that, because of the nature of my work, I learned some of these lessons really early on in my career to build supportive community in the workplace so that I can get the support I need while I'm, on the job, but also to support those around me. Because if I care about my team, if I care about the employees who work on my team, I also care about their families and I care about their friends. And so I want them to feel supported and to have a sense of community at work, because we can't take our work. I work in a field where we can't take our work home with us. We can't take that home and transfer that onto our families. So I think building a positive and supportive work environment that, has trust and dependability. And that really allows me to focus on my family and my loved ones when I'm at home. And, and this balance or this harmony, the information I just shared about kind of the nature of my work and how that really forced me to think about these things much more intentionally, have given me a good lens. And I give this talk sometimes that I call the art of doing it all. And the trick to doing it all is to not do it all. That's the punchline. And there's really no award for being the busiest person on the planet. And this was a really, really hard lesson for me to learn when I was first starting my career. Both in my professional career and even in my Rotary work, I have often found myself being the youngest person in the room. In my previous job, I was the executive director of a advocacy organization. And when I went to my first directors meeting statewide, I walked in and I was definitely the youngest person in the room. And so that kind of made me feel like I had to be extra. I had to be more. I had to be doing everything. And that was a hallmark of my success. So I had this overwhelming and impossible schedule. And then that was some mark of success for me. And I would brag, right? Kind of subtly brag, humble brag about how busy I was and how much I needed a vacation. And now I think about that and how misguided and naive that was. I couldn't sustain it. I didn't deserve it. My family didn't deserve it. Certainly the people I serve and my coworkers don't deserve that of me. And, I laugh now, but why on earth would I be wanting to build a life that I felt I needed to constantly escape from all the time? So for me, achieving this harmony was a journey, but it was one that was worthwhile. And I'm still learning. There's still days that I don't quite have that down, but I'm very, very intentional about it. Striving to be dependable and reliable are how I have stuck to that. So if I make a schedule, I adhere to it. If I tell my kids, we're going to be playing on this afternoon, or we're going on an adventure, or we're going to do this, we're going to go on a hike, or whatever that I'm going to do with my kids, I maintain that commitment to them. If I schedule a meeting with someone or I make a lunch date, I protect that time and I don't budge. For me, learning to just kind of say, hey, no is a full sentence. I don't have to explain myself. I have a variety of other commitments. And when something makes its way into my calendar, kind of into, something that I'm giving attention to, I commit to it. I honor that. I value that, particularly when it involves others' time. I want to value their time as well. So this was a long road for me. The nature of my work forced me to come to terms with that a little earlier than perhaps it would have otherwise. And now I'm in a place where, not feeling overwhelmed by those things, and feeling okay, and not feeling that need to constantly be extra, feeling more secure. And one of my mentors, had said something to me to the effect of, your regular is enough, showing up and being, your regular is just fine. You don't always have to, push the envelope or do one more thing, or be one more thing to someone. Just being you and just showing up is certainly enough. But I think that no is a full sentence, and we don't have to explain ourselves all of the time. And I, as a woman, that's really hard, because we want to start an email by saying, I was just wondering if we could move to this meeting, or I was just wondering, or, oh, I'm really sorry that I can't attend this event or this meeting, or I can't work on this project because, and then we give the big explanation trying to validate it. And I think to young women, to young professional women, like, you have value, you have integrity, you have credibility. You don't have to validate the decisions that you make when we're talking about your time, or when we're talking about your energy. So you can just say, I'm unavailable at that time, and then you can just move forward and suggest some other times. And I think that's a hard skill. I had to, at one point, even had a Post-it note on my desk to remind me of that I didn't need to constantly be adding those explanations. And I think one thing that helped is I had an amazing mentor who was a man, and he was so confident in his role, and so confident in he had such a quiet leadership about him, and he was so supportive of me and pushed me in really healthy ways, that I saw that quality in him. And then when I looked around, and I realized that maybe doesn't come as naturally to women, and so I had to actively work at it, and not give myself permission. I wasn't being rude. I was just being firm and decisive. And my mentor and former boss, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a judge that I worked for. And one thing, he didn't use these words, but one thing, when I think about all the things he taught me, was that grace and grit can exist in the very same moment. And so that's why I always think of, just be willing to be boldly kind, even in the face of people who aren't being kind, or situations that are impossible. When I talk with, college students and things like that, in those types of groups who are emerging professionals and young professionals, I often encourage them to make a date with themselves, and to keep it, once a month or every few weeks, to set aside time where they just invest in themselves. And, if it's in a professional setting, thinking about why you're doing this work. Why is it important to you? What are your goals? Because it's so easy to get lost in the day to day. So I think just being intentional and taking that kind of self inventory, and valuing your own time. I work in the social services sector. I'm a social worker by training, and there's kind of this undercurrent in my field that you have to give and give and give and give. And that's certainly the way that I was trained of, it's always, give first, give first, give first. And I've seen this shift and that, in the preparation where it's really more focusing on, you have to build up yourself and kind of take care of yourself. So I always approach it of, that kind of self-care or self-inventory, taking care of yourself. If your business is people, then that self-care, that self-inventory, that self-work is your professional responsibility. And it's just as important as, professional development, continuing education, all of those things. I would often say to young social workers and to social work students, you know, I could do probably more damage to a person if I were not taking care of myself, if I were constantly showing up to work tired, exhausted, with no bandwidth left, wasn't thinking clearly because I wasn't sleeping. Imagine the impact, the negative impact that I could have on a person that I serve. And I am really thrilled to see as a society, we're starting to elevate that self-work to the same importance, because when you're in the business of interacting with people, it's just too critical and too important to ignore that. So sometimes that approach helps, especially with people who are just so eager in their careers and really want to get out there and really want to make a difference and grow and, kind of climb the ladder, so to speak. But we actually, if we use that climbing the ladder analogy, if we don't take care of ourselves, we're adding weight and making it harder for us to move forward. And sometimes we move in a direction that we're not even sure we want to be moving in. So taking those pauses, being really intentional and slowing things down. Remind yourself every time you walk into a meeting or walk into a space that you don't know everything. And to remind yourself that it's okay that you don't know everything. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you less than to not know anything. So if you walk in with that mindset of, especially if you're going into a collaborative conversation, for example, or you're going into a place where there's going to be feedback coming your way, then I think walking in knowing I don't know what I don't know. And I'm only going to know if I listen, and I listen to the experts in the room, and if I listen to the other perspectives. And when I say experts, I mean people who are expertise in their own perspective and in their own experiences. So I have to listen to that. When I think about leaders I admire, and particularly thought leaders, people that I would consider experts, people that I would turn to their work when I need to solve a problem or when I need information. One quality that those people all seem to share is that they're not afraid, they're not shy to say, I don't know the answer to that question. And particularly as a young professional, as a young woman in a professional setting, I thought me saying, I don't know, was like the kiss of death in a professional or career setting. So I had to get really comfortable just admitting, I don't know the answer to that. I would often say, I can't know that. And that seems like such a silly thing to say, but like, I can't know that because I haven't learned that yet. I haven't read that, or I've never been exposed to that. I haven't had, that information in front of me yet. I need an opportunity to review that. Because I know I'm smart. I know that I have good critical thinking skills. I know that I can solve problems. I know that I can learn. And so when I started to really just own those things about myself and accept those things about myself and be brave enough to say those things about myself without feeling like I was being conceited or, full of myself, but when I could just acknowledge, Jenny, you're smart. You know how to solve problems. You know how to take apart problems so that you can work on them. You have good critical thinking skills. So why in the world would I be embarrassed or feel threatened to say, I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to have to figure that out, or I'm going to have to learn, or I'm going to have to consult with someone who knows more about that than I do.